and also through the different networks of different institutions. This event has different leaders of the private sectors, of agribusiness, of the whole hemisphere. In the understanding that today we are aware that this global pandemic has shown us fragility on our economies, and at the same time this is generating new opportunities. So we should think together a new sector of development linked to rural and agriculture economy. This model can only be possible through the synergic sector, public and private, and the different association of civil society. I want to thank very sincerely to our special guests. And I mean Victor Villalobos, Emerit Director of this institution and Minister of Agriculture of Mexico, and and Roberto Rodriguez, former Minister of Brazil, leader and very active of the cooperative actions in the region and the world. And I say that he's a personal friend. Besides this message, I want to extend to the presence of the Subsecretary, Mr. Winder, very good friend of ICA, for participating in this event, sharing your opinions on the different roles of the private and public sector of agricultural sector today, as well as the building of a new sectoral vision to the future. I want to express my gratitude to the different speakers that will be with us in this forum and representatives of the 5 regions that our institute works. I refer Susana Iturri, Bosco de la Vega for the northern, Cinia Chavez for the central region, and by the southern region, we will have Luis Eugenio Villasanti and Basil Stewart for the Caribbean region. All of them with as entrepreneurs and visionaries and leaders of agriculture sector. In order to be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, there are some actions that will allow us to be optimistic that we have different coincidence that agriculture in our continent has to be consolidated as a key factor for the different reactivations of our economies. In order for this, ICA launches and has a conviction that the new sustainable and equitable agriculture will be a powerful catalyzer for the economic and social development of our countries. Given said this, I give the floor to Diego Montenegro, our moderator that represents ICA in Mexico and coordinator of the actions of ICA and the northern sector, in order to know the mechanics of the development of this forum and to share with you a survey of the hemispheric area in order that will allow us to study the present and future of the agribusiness sector and the different discussions of this event. Thank you very much for being today. And I pass Diego the microphone. Diego, you have the floor now. Thank you very much, General Director. I reiterate the welcome and my good feelings to the different panelists and the amount of the different persons that are today with us in the 3 different languages, English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and the network in the those of you who are in the social media, thank you very much. And today we have different challenges and opportunities. COVID 2019 has discovered Latin America and the low increase of the economic development and inequality, but also finds the Caribbean and the Americas with a young population, a very diverse region and creativity in order to carry out public policies and to carry out different endeavors in the rural area of agribusiness. Given said this, the purpose of this event, this forum, is to hear from the maximum leaders and the different institutions of the Americas and the Caribbean, the different actions and roles that they have been using during the COVID-19, and even more important, to see and hear the different statements of the new updated vision of the agricultural sector or agribusiness sector, because that's how we understand the future of new agribusiness. And the second goal is to create a permanent space so that different sectors of agribusiness can exchange information, experiences in relation to this new vision, this renewed vision of the platform that will be facilitated and managed by ICA. And now I give very fast a few indications on the forum, how we are going to be working. And we start with a very brief presentation of the outcomes that this survey, this study of more than 150 leaders of different institutions in the ministry that were carried out during this last 2 weeks. We are going to have presentations of Dr. Villalobos, then Dr. Miguel Garcia Winder, and the former Minister of and then we will have the former Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Roberto Rodriguez from Brazil, an agribusiness leader. On a second group, we will have the 5 speakers that then we are going to have our sessions for questions submitted via chat with responses by the presenters. So I want to remind you that you will only have 10 minutes for your presentations. We will try to be very respectful in the compliance with this schedule. And 2 minutes before ending every presentation, we will let you know that you still have 2 minutes in order to be ready to finish with your presentation. And also I want to tell you that some questions will be able through at the end of the forum, you will be able to answer to each one of the questions by the different panelists. Without any more preamble, I invite Joaquin Arias, technician of ICA, designated for ICA and recognized officer of our institute, to speak about the different findings on this survey, so that in this manner, this event will be studied and how this development has been achieved. So I pass the floor to him. Thank you very much, Diego. And thank you to all of you for being in this moment, sharing space for a discussion that for me it's strategic and necessary. As Diego said, I will summarize the main outcomes that basically were oriented to have inputs for this new vision that we are speaking on agribusiness, convinced that it is necessary to have a joint agenda channel for sustained development on the development of the Americas. Especially this survey had 3 main actions. What's the situation? How do you see different variables in the development of the sector? Second, what is the role or the new roles that this agribusiness sector has to start working on, and some lights on what are the features that this new agriculture will have that we are seeing. And first of all, I would like to point out the profile of those who participated in the survey. We had about 27 countries of the region. This is just a study. It's not a statistical information, but it's very interesting. And I want to make it clear that the concentration of the responses were in the Caribbean and the Andean group, and basically those who answered as belong to the primary production sector, and they represent the services of support of the chain, and some participate in many activities that belong to the integrated sector. The first thing that we ask, what's the perception of the different key variables that are in the development of the sector? If you see there's an inclination towards the left side, there's a negative perception or reduction in many of different variables that are key factors. The first is investment, which we believe is very important. Many of them perceive a decrease in the investment and also in labor, which we believe it's critical for the harvest of 2021. Access to credit access, it's indicating that is being decreased. The compliance to the payment of um, clients, there's financial stress, and in order to lower the sales. And also there's an indication of problems in the availability of inputs. And of course, these variables are hypotheses. And starting from this consultation, um, I, I see in the data that we have in the case of Argentina, how the first 5 months of the year, more than 50% the imports of seeds and um, fertilizers have dropped. These are issues that we can speak a little bit more and study more. And also statistics are more or less the same proportions that are volume of production, more or less, for through different media. We see that we do not have a problem of food scarcity. Instead, production increases. And here we see a figure, a number that sometimes it drops, sometimes it's kept the same, and also production services in general are being given despite the restrictions of the pandemic. A very important issue, and in order to rescue this, prices of the agricultural products are kept more or less the same, and instead the prices of inputs, fertilizers, are increasing. So we have a decrease on the offer of inputs, and generates a question that has to deal with the profitability of the business that we have to study in the development of the pandemic. And also the second result outcome that we had about the survey, which is very interesting, the features or characteristics and orientations that this new agriculture has to have, thinking of post pandemic, not post COVID, because today we are with them. But if once we overcome the pandemic, these new features, we see different variables that were in the survey, and we try to summarize in the different categories. One has to deal with innovation and trade. Many answers are led to new products, and very interesting. They speak a lot about different or similar opinions on a different approach oriented towards export, but also oriented towards internal domestic trade. And also there were questions about trade barriers, and there was no need of implementing these trades. And we saw that this electronic trade is out in this figure, and we see how this innovation is very important in trade, not only on productive. And the second group is the sustainable intensification. We have addressed this in such a way that many proposals have new systems of production as biotechnology, be a little bit more productive, and to innovate more, etc. There are many new proposals that are leading us to have new ideas on what emphasis we should place on new technologies. And we know that they are at hand and not necessarily are being adopted. And the next category has to deal with quality. Here we have agriculture as health, food safety, and different agriculture products, quality, sales, traceability, etc. There are many other issues that, of course, are alone there, but they also were important about the importance, for example, in the management of risk management. And the third outcome, which is good to point out in this new survey, the new roles that the private sector sees. Here are many interesting roles already taken by the private sector, which is production, profitability, or yielding, and of the business, and to be present in the market. And we see here that there's an important emphasis towards how the private agribusiness sector overcomes the only 2 minutes left. Thank you. Uh, food safety, generation of employment, generation of currency, and to contribute to the quality of food and nutrition of population. These are goals which are greater and many very interesting. Besides being profitable, we have to contribute to these different sectors. And the other, which is very strong in the survey, we see issues that has to deal with institutionality. This is the goal placed by the private sector and the entrepreneurial sector for different and public institutions. So they need to have strategic actions, and the other issue is to work with the media in order to increase production, science and technology, and innovations, and different practices, and investment, also access to financing, etc. And of course, the traditional goal of production of food, which has to deal with logistic distribution, etc. And finally, where there is an open question in our survey, where we have few key words that has to deal with different actions that has to be taken into consideration with agriculture. And you can see the different emphasis that and different nutritional and food safety, financing, innovation, training, analysis, new technology in sustainable intensification, private, public systems, etc. And with this, I have that we have many issues to be discussed in this forum. Thank you for your hearing. Thank you, Diego. Thank you, Joaquin, for this brief summary. Of course, there's a lot of rich information, and we can go and study it a little bit more in the future and add additional information in order to broaden this platform, and that we will be hearing. Thank you, Joaquin, again for joining us in this forum and complying with the 10 minutes time. With this, I will request to place the video of the Secretary Villalobos had presented for this presentation for this forum. Thank you. I'm very happy to welcome you at the beginning of this agribusiness forum for post-COVID-19. This is an opportunity to be able to tell you that the situation that prevails in Mexico today and in the rest of the world merits the work of the private and public sector with the civil society, all the actors of our sector, in order not to only pass this pandemic but also through coordinated manner to continue strengthening our sector in Mexico and in the rest of Latin America. So I'm very pleased that this forum be coordinated and convened by ICA, and I congratulate Diego Montenegro for this initiative, because through this, not only we are getting close and we understand the goals and capacity that we have in order to overcome this crisis, but also through the discussion and through the different interventions and presentations, be able to assist this problem. So I congratulate you, I congratulate ICA and all of you for this initiative, and I hope that the outcome results will allow us to continue defining different policies that we need to implement in order dedicated post-COVID-19. Thank you, and success, I hope to, for you. Thank you. Good morning. Government of Mexico, Agriculture. Thank you very much, Secretary Villalobos, for this message. We will give the floor now to the Secretary Miguel former Secretary of Agriculture, Mr. Roberto Rodriguez, and with a lot of experience in the as Subsecretary of Agriculture of Mexico, as Miguel Garcia. Miguel Garcia has the floor. I'm sorry. Thank you, Diego. It's a pleasure, Manuel, it's a pleasure to see you and to share with you, with friends as Daniel, Cinia, and Bosco, which we have a personal relationship with. Daniel, I think that we were able to see in the previous meeting, Daniel, yes? Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to share a few personal ideas, not only the ideas of the secretary, nor the secretariat, but these are personal ideas with the questions that Diego present to us. We were asked with 3 questions, and I would like to see the second question, that will be the features of the new agribusiness sector post-COVID, because I think that if we approach that one, we can continue with the other 2. I think that COVID gave us evidence of the weaknesses that the agricultural systems of the hemisphere had. Some we should have seen them before, definitely, that sometimes we ignore voluntarily, and it gives us the opportunity to understand other areas or discover different areas where did not have any idea on what was happening. For example, I mentioned where the people with less resources in popular areas have their food, and we have a great need of working in the articulation of all these urban rural markets in the different poor areas. The other issue is that we have to be very careful in the application of a new agriculture, that everything has to be related by COVID, but not others are related with COVID, but only structural problems that exist. What's going to happen? I do not know. I think here we are facing two different instances. What's going to happen in this new agribusiness? And we can build it from an ideal one, and the other is the reality, what's happening. The ideal perspective, I think, that gives us the opportunity to rebuild a new world with a new form of social relationship, where we seek different actions of articulation of the different elements of the chains. And I think that we are acknowledging in a very important manner the role of the local markets, the role played by the power of the informal consumption, the consumption of the classes that depend every day of low incomes, and the great impact that it has in food, and the way that the agro-entrepreneurial sector will be relating with other employees. And I think that this is an opportunity in order to redefine their role, this agribusiness entrepreneurial system group, not only to recreate the bottom line, but also function in a broader manner from the entrepreneurs. And this is given in a moment where we were questioning the different models of the last 30 years, models that were inefficient, uh, very inefficient, sometimes efficient, not too much, but much more inefficient. And I want to uh, understand in creating a new way and how we can create in the future a new com- elements of food systems, chain food systems that will allow us to have in a data as well-being of the different society, to think ourselves and to think what we are going to do in order to understand this epidemic of a disease. I think that COVID gives us a new opportunity for the public sector. There are important ways of rethinking what we are going to do. What we see, less interventors, more rectors, or less interventors, and in some issues, but be more chiefs in public sector, and to orient resources, not only to assist the immediate part of the pandemic, but with social resources that in Mexico has a very special vision and very strong programs to assist the pandemic, but also to build new articulations. I think that the pandemic gives different governments tremendous responsibility to strengthen all their institutions, especially research, innovation institutions, education institutions, in order to adapt us for the future, but also quality and food safety institutions. Mexico still, we have markets that trade exotic products, and it's very important to strengthen markets which are less inspected. We need to strengthen and to avoid uh, diseases. We are not finishing with pandemic COVID when a new swine flu has been addressed, and some other flus that are we're having in agriculture, and other which was not clear in the survey. The governments have the tremendous responsibility to have open world trade markets. Every day we are seeing stronger protective measures, and this, even in some exporting countries, we see an increase in the prices of rice, for example, that at least in the beginning were forbidden. So this gives the government to strengthen its activities in order to give less pesos to the market and to find a more realistic trade. I'm very happy to see the private sector that we were in here in Guatemala, where we were how the chain of supply to be generated. And here we are going to have a responsibility on rethinking and to reevaluate and to place distance in its commitments of social responsibility, environment responsibility, and share benefits among all of us. And this will help us to think how we're going to work.
The worst that can happen is that once the pandemic is decreases, which probably will take a few months, is to go back to where we were before, to the same way of linking the chains, of forgetting the effects of this pandemic, of seeking profit over everything else, above everything else. So I think this is a historic opportunity for a generation that may actually change the way human relations are and our relationships towards Mother Nature in the forthcoming years. So I just don't want to go into more details, but I just want to confirm that this allows us to think new ways to relate socially, supported by a new way to produce, a new way to consume, and maybe in a very idealistic way, in my opinion, this gives us the opportunity that institutions such as ICA has been adopting a very important leading role because it gives us the opportunity to change the pathway the world had been following, and then we can change things for the next 100 years. So I think we need to be very careful. Let's not just blame everything on COVID. COVID has given us the opportunity to see those failures that we forgot. And I think that institutions such as yours can actually help us focus on those failures or those flaws and see how people get their food and where and how they get it and where they get it. So that is something that we can focus on. And thank you. I think I have stayed within my time. And of course, I can say a lot more, but here we only have 6 minutes or so. Thank you, Diego. Thank you, Otero, for the opportunity and all the presenters for listening to me. Thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you very much for your deep thoughts on the definition of roles of the private, the public sector, and renewed visions on markets and to look into innovation from the private sector. All those are key factors for the development of the agricultural sector. Thank you also for staying within the allotted time because this allows us to take the best advantage of this event. Now we would like to invite Mr. Roberto Rodriguez, former Ministry of Agriculture of Brazil, an agribusiness leader with a very particular emphasis on supporting and promoting cooperativism in Brazil and worldwide. He is a partner in different companies, and he is a friend of all of us, and ICA. Roberto Rodriguez, welcome once again, and you have 10 minutes for your presentation. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Diego Montenegro. It's a pleasure being here with you and dear friend Miguel Otero, Manuel Otero. It's a great pleasure having you here as well. Miguel Garcia, dear friend. Just a quick correction, Diego. I'm not a leader. I'm a former leader because I'm on my way down. I'm kind of rolling down the hill now, as the way we say it in the South. So I'm going to try to answer the questions that you asked me. And first of all, I just want to apologize for my Spanish because, of course, it's not perfect. Now, the first question has to do with what is the role of the public and private sector? Well, I'm going to talk about what happened here, what has happened here from January until June. Well, in the private sector, first of all, cannot stop producing, cannot stop working. This is something that people finally realized. In the city, restaurants, shops, and businesses were closed, but in the field, we cannot stop because nature imposes our work pace. And aside from producing, we need to keep the distribution chain system organized, which is especially private here. And of course, we need to guarantee access for consumers to products and also reach the ports so that contracts are complied with. Now, public sector, it was key to work to guarantee that there was no interruption in the distribution chain because here we had some sort of lack of connection between the federal government decisions and then federal and then state. the federal government said everybody had to make its own decision. So this led to a lot of confusion, and some majors just shut down their cities, and they wouldn't let trucks go through with agricultural products. So the federal government, and here I would like to highlight the job of the Ministry of Agriculture, who's been very agile and skillful, and she managed to fix that so that nobody was lacking anything countrywide. Aside from that, other topics became much more sensitive, if I may call them that way, like food safety and the quality of food. We had a very serious problem of losses and waste. Is that the word in Spanish? Well, there was much waste due to this initial confusion, and some sectors were faced with very serious problems, like the flower sector. That was a disaster because there were no more parties, no more marriages, no more congresses. So the flowers were lost, and that was something that the government tried to rescue later on. Also, they try to guarantee the income of producers because losses were fatal, but also some incomes were lost. So we underwent a very, very difficult moment, but Brazil managed to enhance or widen its exports. I think it's the only country that's been able to increase the exports. For example, in soy, being up to June 30, we have exported 60 million tons of soy, compared to 43 million the same period last year. In sugar, 30% increase. Beef, 7% increase. So this was amazing. Even for us, private sector just got together in a very clear way in trying to guarantee the internal supply and exports. Now, something I feel greatly sorry about and that I want to share with all of you that also affected us is that there are certain sectors where some producers are have the problem of prior debts, and they're just trying to take advantage of COVID to have those debts pardoned. But we are rejecting those, and that exists too. Now, the second question: what are the main characteristics of the new sector? Well, I think we have 2 or 3 key characteristics. One of them is that safety or health will increase the control measures. I think the World Health Organization was not capable itself of dealing with this topic in a consistent and coherent manner. So new measures will arise, looking into the quality of food and food safety. Another topic that was touched upon was the part of protectionism. That has already been pinpointed. Some countries are already trying not to export their normal surplus so that they don't have any lack of food within their borders. And also, they are trying to prevent products coming from more competitive countries. So there's going to be a disruption in world trade, probably, with this new protectionism that is arising. And this new protectionism will be mainly built upon food safety or security, food security. And I think that's the key issue post-COVID. You know the problem we had in the Caribbean in terms of supply. So this is something that everything is built around protectionism, exports, complications in the market. Another issue that will come up probably is something that Miguel also touched upon, is part of innovation, new technologies, new mechanisms that will rise arise in a very clear way with a bioeconomy. The part of energy will be also dealt with. And I think agriculture will have the chance to work on those. And also things related to sustainability, support or defense of the environment, and some possible food changes or food habit changes. Because we are all at home, but I see the youth here in Brazil at least migrating strongly towards foods that are of vegetable origin and going against beef or meat. I don't know. I don't know how they'll do their churrasco in the future with cassava, but I don't know. It's something that is going on, and we need to keep an eye on that because if demand changes, we need to change production as well. So we need to hold that discussion as well. You have 2 minutes left. Okay, I'm almost done. So the strategy would be the third question. I think we need to take into consideration everything related to infrastructure. And it's not like the government has to do things. The companies have to deal with this because they will be they have to be the ones guaranteeing exports and even animal well-being in terms of traceability and certification. I think that in the future, in the near future, we will have the need to work closely with national parliaments because probably we will have to amend laws and other legal instruments that will change the way people behave in the future. Technological topics like connectivity, this will be arriving with much strength and will have a very important participation of cooperatives because the large companies will have access to technologies, but the small farmers will not. So cooperatives will play a fundamental role in conveying this information to small producers and also reaching parliaments so that laws change in favor of the sector, not against the sector. So Diego, I think I complied with my time. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Roberto. All your thoughts were very clear in terms of the need to coordinate the 3 levels of government and everything that has to do with health, protectionism, which is a responsibility mainly of the public sector, and also the views for sustainability towards the future. Definitely. We'd like to let you know that right now we have around 290 people connected to the different social media channels. And I would like to remind you that you can ask your questions via the chat room, which has been enabled for that purpose. We have already received a few questions, but we urge you to continue typing in your comments and your questions in the chat room. Thank you very much, Roberto, for your excellent presentation. Now, we will welcome Susana Iturri, Manager of Agri Exports of ADEX Peru. She represents the Andean region. So now we're going to start with the regional panels. She has an MBA from the University of Korea, the Korea Business School from Seoul, 10 years of experience in different positions related with foreign trade. And she's a specialist in commercial promotion of food. Susana, welcome to this forum. Thank you very much, Diego. Thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be here to representing the Exporters Association of Peru. We are very thankful that we were given this opportunity to present what has been our experience with regards to international trade and the experience that our exporters have had, but also how this situation has had an impact after the almost 4 months of lockdown in the local market and how that has affected our producers, agriculture producers. One of the main fears of the pandemic is to have a lack of provisioning because people were buying large amounts of product and there were long lines, but there was no lack of availability, this except for flour because everybody became a baker at home. But I think this has led to some level of anxiety releasing method for many people. The importance that the business sector has had in remaining active during the circumstances that were not normal at all. Many problems had to be overcome due to the restrictions to mobilization and also due to the safety protocols. And I refer specifically to workers in production factories. And when we talk about human resources, we have identified a high level of responsibility the companies have had because they have been to faced with having their businesses closed while still paying their workers, paying the wages of the workers that were not working and were not producing has helped to lower the impact of the pandemic in the economy of these people who are low income people. For the companies, it has also seen peace and order thanks to this behavior. We are suffering a recession as a country, but during these 4 months, we have felt some sort of alliance and unity as a country and a sense of patriotism. In the case of foreign trade, as Exports Association and as a business association, we have always focused on paying attention to health regardless of the economic cost. The position of the Peruvian government has been from the very beginning, we need to protect our citizens, and the associations of the agricultural sector and businesses have supported the companies so that they don't go bankrupt, and they wanted to support also the government in this huge fight. Regarding the second question is which are the main characteristics of the new agricultural sector, we think that the agricultural sector in Peru represents a case different to other sectors because it has not been affected by the stagnation of production, but it has been affected because of the economic crisis, because this deep recession in which we are has contracted the local market and the long and even in the medium and even long term. So we are faced with the risk of having less sales at lower prices in terms of what we can foresee for 2021. We think that today the Peruvian agricultural sector has to pay more attention to the exports. Exporting leads to more difficulties to producers, of course, because they still have a traditional view. But what we need to highlight here is that not all companies and associations of food production are aligned into increasing their productivity and working on the quality of their products to increase it and also to get the certifications that they need to get, and also to look into the security that is requested by the international market. Our buyers worldwide are ever more thinking that they will only continue buying only if they get all the warranties that all the products of Peru are observing the health measures and requirements, and that's a huge challenge for our exporters. Then also something else that we need to have in this sector is sustainability. I agree with the other presenters that presented before me. No, sorry, love working together so that all micro and medium-sized companies can actually survive the situation in the future. Even though we have to be sincere, we don't see an internal force driving them. It's more something that is a cultural thing within our society, that being together sometimes makes them feel that they're going to be competing among themselves, but that's not going to work. And that's the change of mind that we have to have as associations who support companies. Then we also would like to have a development plan for the sector and coordinate all the different authorities, both at the central and local level. When we go into the third question, which was what was the role that the private agricultural sector have in the construction of a new agricultural sector post-COVID. We hope it's going to be one of the most important driving forces for growth in our country. Taking into consideration the effects of the pandemic in Peru that were worse towards the middle of the summer, it coincided with the low season for exports. And I remember that at the beginning of February, we were already feeling that the pandemic was getting closer to Latin America. All the companies, exporting companies of cranberries and mango, had an attitude such as, "Ooh, saved by the bell. I just finished exporting the entire year production." And they had very positive figures. But the companies that will have to face this during this recession period have a very complicated scenario. And as a private institution that works hand in hand with the central government, we need to support them in the best way possible. In this sense, the agricultural business will need to have a better health certification system. We will ask for, because we're faced with more stringent markets, and we also have to work on the diversification of markets because we don't have a clear idea of what the recovery process will be during the second semester of the year. We work hand in hand with ProPeru, which is the export promotion agency in Peru, and they carried out a survey at the beginning of the year to know what was the feeling of import companies in the world who are already clients of Peru. Rosie, 2 minutes, and Susana, 2 minutes. And one of the answers that was most frightening is that these importers were telling us that what they were going to do is work only with the suppliers that they already knew and trusted for years, because they didn't want to be at risk of buying from a new supplier that might not be able to comply with the health specifications, because right now it is not possible to go and have this plant visits that could be done before to make sure that everything was going on well, and that what they were paying for was what they were going to get. So also in this survey, they said that they were going to do everything possible to keep their clients happy so that they can make sure that they could have a long lasting relationship. So what I think about this is that as an exporters association, we're going to do everything in our hands to help the companies, and everything also align in leading them towards an productive e-commerce that will allow them to continue producing and accessing markets of their interest. Thank you. Thank you very much, Susana, for staying within the 10 minutes, a lot of time. Very interesting, specifically because you mentioned many things that are happening in practice. As Roberto was saying as well, and Miguel, that the private sector cannot stop and never stopped completely. So Certifications are key, that because they're now going to become more strict to be able to export, and that's something that is already going on. Definitely. We've been asked if for Bosco de Vega to have his presentation a bit later because he's at a meeting right now. So we're going to ask Miss Cinia Chavez to go ahead with her presentation. And for our colleagues of the headquarters, to let them know that there was a change in the order. And so now we will be listening to Cinia Chavez before Mr. Bosco de la Vega. Cinia, it's a great pleasure to see you once again. It's wonderful to have you here at this forum. Go ahead, you have 10 minutes. So thank you very much, Director General and Don Diego, for organizing this wonderful platform, and my dear Miguel, so that hopefully we can hug and sing again together very soon. Like it's been said before, this pandemic has stripped us in the positive side, but it has also shown us the darkest side. And I think that's the one we need to focus on to be able to develop specific actions towards the sector. And I'm going to talk specifically about the coffee sector, which is not different in a cross-cutting sense of everything that is going on in the agricultural sector. And I would also focus on the small holding of farmers in the southern hemisphere. For the most part, we need to foster or drive some systematic approaches, not just think that we're each in our own little side, and try to develop a roadmap that will allow us to potentialize what we do. And that's why my new approach towards the agricultural sector includes everything that has strengthened us during this time of tragedy, but that will also allow us to have more possibilities in the future. The use of technology is key. It's not that they don't exist, but we not only have to talk about the use, but the access to them. And here I talk about the democratization of information. My country has lots of experience in public, free education, and we should not leave the agricultural sector limited to that access and to these wonderful technologies that in the long run are only in a few hands. So we need to make an effort to make this access to these technologies a more democratic access. Costa Rica has a wonderful experiences with some technological application for coffee producers that allow us not only to reach in a faster way people, but that it also saved us during this time, because we never thought that when we launched this innovation, we never thought we were going to have such a great support. Largest challenge for coffee production is labor, because everything is harvested by hand, and we depended on migrant labor greatly. So by having this platform, having a way to have some local labor has been great.
Accesar a esa información y reconocer gente que ofrece y ser una plataforma tecnológica utilitaria nos ha permitido avanzar mucho en un tema que tenemos que tener listo en un cortísimo plazo para arrancar, si Dios lo permite, la primera semana de octubre recolectando café, de agosto, perdón. Entender la importancia de un sector transparente.
To understand the importance of a transparent sector that will allow us to have traceability, this transparency of the sector, we launch it with a very positive manner, and we were prepared already with the traceability system. But now this is a tool which is very important for the support of the sector, a very responsible sector from the perspective in order to understand what we are doing and the health areas. And I really want to thank ICA for its technical support, and this will allow us that our farms will be safe. This is a new issue, farms with safety places, not in a holistic manner, how we can solve the sanitary issues because we have to solve other areas since COVID. And this new sector of agriculture that prepares itself for a safe crop estimation and and actually in order to have a clean harvest, also this allow us to work in an institutional manner to compromise not only remodelation of the systems, but to guarantee the building of this new system. The social part, then, it's a very important element to strengthen the new way of life, taking into consideration not only the payment of goods, services, and but in this holistic concept of traceability, try to understand that we have to offer tools as houses of happiness and areas where the mothers can be established in order to take care of their children and to guarantee through the institutionality a sector that can accede to and have their competitivity and sustainability, which we are seeking. We share very similar experience what Peru has mentioned. Um, Sinia has mentioned, but in this understanding in a systemic manner, we see that coffee is not in our market. We need many agents that collaborate in the chain, and that in some aspects, if we have a problem, the problem will be assisted. We have to be more understanding and less independent. The use of governance, and I speak this in a clear manner that represents public-private alliance to build public policies. It's very important. We discover that many times we do not have these routes very well defined. And especially for the coffee producers, we need to know where are we going to commit and comply with their actions. In the case of post-COVID coffee sector, we need to have a competitive, technical, innovative sector with strong public-private alliances, and this takes us to the financing sector, which has been already expressed, but it also obliges us to have industrial new system, the ways of leadership and trade and communication that many times the inspectors that has less support in quality and training, of course, and the use of technologies. As you see, we have important tasks that we have to comply. We can carry out this in specific actions. Our experience with coffee in Costa Rica at the present time, having a harvest of coffee harvest in a moment where we are going to have the human interactions are generalized, and it has to oblige the private public institutions to try to give different alternatives to the producers of understanding what's the how we are going to work with in this situation. This is a new opportunity of a new approach. Where are we going to be going in this manner, nor in the governments, in an independent manner, nor in the private sector? This need of having a structure of shared governance has to exist in order to be positive. If some positive experience in Costa Rica is to have important information that we have transformed them into data and has allowed us to comply and to finish with many problems. We see how we know how many persons we need for harvesting. If we do not have that information, we would have not been able to have the information in order to cover labor in the different farms. So the data and to have information, because we have discovered the sector in a very broad manner, handles the data, what the sector can have, to have data in order to be able to solve problems in the agriculture sector. I think that it is very important to know, because this has limited if we do not have the information in order to solve the immediate problems. So I have taken in a great, with great support, these questions. So in order to have different ways of solving these problems that we expected to be different in this century, but has placed us to have a difficult problem in order to be able to understand all the problems in order to solve them as a whole. Not only you comply, but you were 1 minute earlier of your time. Thank you, Sinia, for your. Sinia is an exporter, coffee producer, leader in her sector, the executive director of the ICAFE in Costa Rica, and former Vice Minister of Agriculture in Costa Rica. Um, Thank you, Sinia, for your collaboration and your opinions and clear ideas. Thank you. Now, you can continue asking. You can ask questions through chats. You can write down your questions, and this will be given at the end of the presentation, and you can continue writing them through chat. And so, following the agenda, we have we had Mr. Villasanti, Luis Eugenio Villasanti of the region, southern region, and I want to thank Dr. Daniel Pellegrina, who is joining us with this event last night. And I thank you for preparing your presentation in a short period of time. And Mr. Pellegrina is an economist, agricultural economist with a lot of experience in dairy business, has been linked in with dairy Pale in Argentina. He's a rural producer and advisor of agricultural companies, director of many of the countries, vice president of AMAN, president of the Rural Argentinian Society. Mr. Daniel, you have the floor now with 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Diego, for the opportunity. And president of rural societies, Mr. Eugenio Villasanti was not able to be here. In order to answer these three questions that you were asking, what's the role of the private sector in order to assist the food needs because of the pandemic, we need to point out the high degree of the agribusiness companies and institutions, because we are dedicated to produce food to all the region and all the chains of the different food supply chain. No, in the this has been shown, at least in the countries that I referred, this high degree of biological safety that our productive systems are produced. This is an advantage that we have to see this in the cases of the Southern Cone. The food production, as you know, is a very important role within their economies. And this is the role of the companies and the private sector linked to food production is sad, because one side they would like to keep the normal situation because of we have complied with this, but also to keep as a second safety the human resources that make this possible, and to have very active the food value chain. They have worked different process in order to be able to keep the main component as the activity and production for this in order to be able to keep their systems for international trade in an active manner and fluid manner, because we have been able to comply with the international commitments and taking our exports with the integration of all the food supply chain, and this has allowed us to have a stability. Of course, not speaking about the problems of the economy that all the countries have. Our companies have been the circumstances have been supporting, and this has allowed us to have normal supply and the stability at an international level, and this has been reflected with some stability in the prices of the global market, seeing that this is one of the largest crises of the history, and we have seen. With the second question, what are the main features, characteristics that we see for our agribusiness sector post-pandemic? Definitely there we see we need to synchronize very positive with the consumers to be able to be developing new features, characteristics for food safety, for the consumers. New technologies will allow us to be more horizontal, these systems, these food value chain more simple. And here we are seeing some possibilities of changes in the localization of the businesses, and also digitalization on how one of the main issues of production. First, we have with many countries that are big, this system that we are having here with digitalization, and the way we are connecting is very important to us, but at the same time will give us many tools that will make it more conflictive. Our economy's risk and development that has to be done in the different sectors, everything that has to do with price coverage and information on prices, all of this that has been very important for electronic payments, as many of these that off-chain will give us for the certification of the different processes that are important in the modernization of today. Consumers, this is one of the main projects that we have to cover specifically with measuring different processes. How are we going to show the consumers the way we produce, and based on science, not on the emotion sometimes, but there's a whole challenge in the way of regionalization, of course, has been seen that facing these challenges with COVID is much more difficult if we do it alone. It's easier if we share information, and if there's more international cooperation in all the aspects. This definitely will give us more regional support of integration and more safety at a regional level. And especially with the supply, we have challenge there, as in Latin America, in order to be able to cover the needs within the region. This will allow us to answer some rules that are mentioned here, for example, protection barriers, and these are things that we, to have a simple food value chain, this is will seek how to improve their safetyness, and this will have more easier manner of trying to supply through the food value chain, and especially to certain degree of greater information that we know within the change. This has been permanent in the different groups in order to seek and understand the bottlenecks, in order when we develop and advance in this food value chain, in production, in exports. And this really is a work we have been doing with our governments, and has really been made through different understanding in the local governments, and also the intermediate associations have been involved in order to be successful. The third question was the role that, in order to cover this new agribusiness sector, how can this sector has been after the COVID-19, they help is to be able to help the agenda, to rebuild the agenda is going to be very important in order to give this agribusiness viewpoint in order to see in a systematic manner. And that's why I speak about value chains, supply chains, and this gives us information to the financial processes, technical and trade sectors. But this view of with a state that has to be at the service of the private in production and to give all the necessary infrastructure that will allow us to generate more competitivity in our region. And in this manner, we understand this role in order to have opportunities to be closer directly with the consumers and to explain them and to inform them where we produce and how do we do. This is a very important factor to take into consideration to make it possible to give value, to be closer with the consumers and in showing who we are, we have as associates with agribusiness sectors, and more or less to work together with the public sector in order to be able to implement the framework of different rules with competition, and this will be necessary. And of course, launch everything that has to deal with public-private work as this forum, as the way we have to work within the Federation of Mercosur, together with our government, within the agribusiness Southern Council with the different ministers, where we have meetings and proposals of different proposals. And in order to continue with these meetings, and also not only producers, but also companies of exporting companies and also the private associations of the countries, it's very important to have joint factors, companies that work together and to have a regional viewpoint. And this the ideas will be approached and the discussions will be in some manner to have a new scenery where we are going to be able, as somebody mentioned, this has been a product of the COVID and pandemic, and these are structural issues that we have for many years, and these will be included in the discussions where we are going to change and be in a developed manner and positive manner. Thank you, Daniel. Very clear your presentation and coincides with many other speakers that spoke about digitalization and the use of TICs and appeared in the period of this pandemic time, and these are already left in the opened market integration and simplified food value chains, and also public-private link, which has to be included, and Cinia Chavez mentioned in her presentation. We are going to continue with our colleague of the Caribbean, Mr. Basil Stewart. He has a presentation in English. I will continue speaking in Spanish, and there the translations have to be active right now with the interpretation. He's a agribusiness international marketing development specialist with over 30 years of diversified and practical experience in agribusiness value chain development in the Caribbean, gained through working with national, regional, and international public and private sector. He is president of the Association of the Caribbean. Mr. Basil Stewart of the Caribbean has the floor. You have the floor. Thank you, Basil.
Hi, good morning to all, and good afternoon to those who are in other parts of the Caribbean. Are you hearing me clearly? Hello? Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're translating into Spanish.
Go ahead. Yes.
let me thank Ika and Montenegro and his team for inviting Kaba to be part of this discussion.
But
We think it's an important regional and hemispheric process. We've been asked to respond to 3 questions. The first being to give some indication of what were the actions taken during the first few months of the COVID. And we have responded with a number of indications of actions as it related to ensuring continued food security. Firstly, the issue was to ensure that the food supply system was not disrupted. The government, in fact, allowed the food service industry to function fairly normally. Imports were still allowed, farmers were still allowed to operate. The food suppliers then made appropriate adjustments to ensure that consumers had access to food. In fact, the application of online services, they allowed phone-in orders, curbside pickup, and home delivery became a major part of the distribution system. Specific consumer packages were developed to allow for easy ordering. There were mobile village trucks that went into the remote areas to ensure that people in the rural areas would have access to both domestic and imported food. There was significant increase in household production. Governments provided free planting materials to many households to allow them particularly to produce vegetables. Some private firms, in fact, provided households with baby chicks to allow them to grow some of their own poultry requirements. The charitable organizations became very active in providing food baskets and hampers to those that were more threatened in terms of their food security. Firms continued to pay staff at least a percentage of their salaries to ensure some purchasing capacity was still in place. And even in the financial institutions, deferred payments, loans to private firms to allow them to continue to have funds to meet their food requirements. In terms of affordability and utilization and sustainability aspects of the food security program, there were no real significant increases in prices. There are a few cases where farmers might have been a little excessive in the prices they charge, but there was no major disruption in terms of price increases. The media became very active in promoting healthy eating. There were a lot of TV programs promoting use of local foods, both on social media as well as on the traditional TV station. A number of actions were taken to also ensure that there was capacity to store local food. Indeed, at least one country temporarily restricted imports in order to create space for local raw materials and local farmers and food processors to have capacity to store. And what was also very noticeable, there was an increase innovation in the utilization of local raw material in the production of a range of products, particularly bakery and snack products. Second question was, what will be the main characteristics of a new post-COVID agricultural sector? We think that there will be a significant increase in public-private sector commitment to food security. We have seen already many governments begin to invest in infrastructure. We think that there's going to be a greater use of imported trade policies to create more domestic space, of course, within their international trade obligations. We're seeing greater flexibility in terms of how the MSCs are going to be financed. For example, here in Trinidad, the government has provided a significant amount of capital to the banks and to the credit unions to provide loans to firms, MSCs in particular, that allows for, in fact, interest-free loans, fairly long-term for repayment, and the government, in fact, providing security for up to 75% of a loan. We see going forward that this may become a more, maybe the entire package will not be available, but similar components or some components of this will continue to be available to the private sector. We expect much increased investment in high-tech agriculture, particularly as it relates to control environmental systems, greenhouse production for vegetables, for example. We see greater linkages between the agriculture, tourism, and the health and entertainment sector. What we now describe as agro-recreational tourism will become an increased part of our agribusiness sector, particularly in those countries that have a high tourism visitor level. Second, additionally, the developments in online and social media marketing, we anticipate that that will expand quite rapidly. Many brick and mortar food retailers are going to have some challenge in surviving already. In some of the countries, we're seeing the closure of even large restaurants that have been around for many years are now closing their doors. We anticipate that that will continue. We believe as well that this new online marketing activity will allow producers to have more access to buyers, be able to contact more buyers, including farmers, and therefore be more empowered in terms of the ability to negotiate prices. The third question was, what role will the private agro-industrial sector play in building the new post-COVID-19 agricultural sector? We see that there's going to be far greater public-private partnership in investing in and indeed in managing agricultural infrastructure. Perhaps foremost among this would be the issue of water. We see water as being one of the major constraints to the agricultural sector in the region. And what we are in fact proposing, and we think that this is a public policy that will take traction, is that we as government has been having tremendous problem in providing adequate water. That just as our farmers are prepared to buy other inputs, chemicals, fertilizer, for example, water is in fact in many instances more important than some of these products. And that if there's a market created for agricultural water, that especially if it's backed by public policy that allows it to be affordable, that this is an area where public-private partnership can make a big difference. In the agro-processing infrastructure, we see that as an area as well that the private sector could be encouraged, and we have already seen several examples of that here in Trinidad. It's a major part of the government strategy going forward. And this is an area where there, again, public-private partnership will take place.
You have 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. We also see there's a need to be increased sourcing from the region as the evidence of the threat that the COVID presented to our food security. We recognize that there's a significant disruption to our imports, the kind of negative impact it would have had throughout the region. In terms of export, we see increasing approaches to facilitate joint export marketing on the common either country or Caribbean-wide quality market that will allow us to access international market collectively. We anticipate as well that there is going to be increased investment in the Caribbean restaurant franchises based on regional raw material. And then finally, we expect that there will be very strong proactive promotion of investment in our priority commodities. The region has identified a number of commodities that we believe we can develop competitive advantage in, and also to ensure that we can have a far more food secure region. And in those areas, we anticipate there will be significant public and private sector investment, also as it relates to agro-recreational tourism. So broadly, those are our views in terms of what transpired in the first 3 months, how we see the sector developing, and the critical role that the private sector will have to play as we seek to transform and expand our agribusiness sector in the region. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por esa presentación.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Obviously, the different views and approaches that we may have in the Americas and the Caribbean towards agriculture are based on the needs and the visions of each region. The Caribbean countries that are merely importers that need staples to keep their tourist industry working. So now we have Bosco de la Vega. We thank him because he's pretty much participating in two parallel events. We'd like to thank him for being here. He's been focused on or being involved in companies in the north of Mexico. He's been trained in phytosanitary, financial, and agricultural topics. And he focuses on the improvement of supply chain and particularly potatoes. Bosco, you have 10 minutes. Thank you very much for joining us in this initiative. Go ahead, Bosco. Bosco, your mic is muted. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation that ICA has made for us to participate. I would like to thank Manuel Otero, Mr. Montenegro, and Gabriel Garcia Bingwer, and our colleague presenters. This is a great a way to share what we've been doing in Mexico with regards to the pandemic. According to the world, our countries, our sectors will not be the same before and after the pandemic. This situation is surprising and totally unexpected, and that has led us to rethink the strategies that we've been doing. What's been the role of the private sector, food needs and other needs during these months? And I would like to share with you that from the beginning of the pandemic, we defined 3 key objectives together with our Secretary for Agriculture and Agricultural Development. First, to protect the health of our workers. Second, to guarantee the functioning of the companies in the supply chain. And this was done before the pandemic was declared with information that we already had from Asia and Europe. And third, to establish the foundations for economic reactivation. So in this sense, we have informed the companies in the sector about the measures and recommendations to be implemented to avoid the spreading of the disease, such as distancing, use of masks, and so on and so forth. And we know that there's no company in Mexico that has stopped its production processes due to COVID contamination. And we also generated some special protocols for agricultural companies, taking into consideration the transportation conditions and additional care, taking into consideration the characteristics that the food production process has. Since this is a key sector, we needed to continue producing despite the risks and guarantee the availability of food. And we developed a program called Stay Home. And we did this together with our partners, and we will continue inviting people not to do some panic purchasing. And nobody has had any shortages so far. And we work together with the rural sector, with all the actors in the supply chain, storage, food bank, supermarket chains and all, to detect the problems that might arise during the process, and also do this in cooperation with the Mexican Army and National Guard and our Secretary for Public Defense. So this shows that we need to be closely coordinated in terms of the different problems that may arise. Without a doubt, production units have been forced to modify their processes, and the protocols in food safety, things that have to do with prevention and control of health of not only producers but also consumers. This is something that we do additionally and together to support the population as a whole. Mexico has 14% of its population in food poverty. And as of today, the private effort that we've made, we're talking about 18,000 tons, benefiting a large number of a population, where we have had our army working in food banks with all the different producers and processors and suppliers, so that because we don't have any certainty of when this will stop. We don't have a vaccine yet, but as the government, we are thinking that this is going to last 10 more months. Hopefully, that's going to be it. If otherwise, we'll just rethink and adapt. And what we can rescue from this pandemic is that we have become stronger in helping our fellow citizens. As the agricultural sector, we have seen some changes in the operation and closing of restaurants and consumption centers, change of habits of consumers. We have also seen, I've seen this with my daughter. She's a minor, but she already changed her consumption habits. We've seen how our poultry and pork producers have been affected, and we need to value our guards, our physicians, and our producers. And by April, we have a 6.4% increase in terms of production in the agricultural sector. And so these are the only sectors of the Mexican economy areas that have had a superávit. We have a superávit $4,493, and the increase of GDP decreased minus 2.2 in the first semester, and the only sector that grew was the primary sector. The secondary decreased by 3.5%, and the tertiary 2.2. 1.2. We are very concerned with the projection made by the International Fund because we have a minus to 10% of GDP. And we are concerned because our government has not invested in countercyclic measures. We have sub GDP. We don't have any sub GDP measures, and so we're trying to do things to lower the impact of the pandemic. We're also working on the employment with an increase of 4.6% by May. Another question that we ask ourselves is what would be the role that the agro-industrial private sector will have in the new post-COVID sector? Well, it has shown the nutritional lack of security. Today, Mexico produces a vast majority of the food that is consumed, but we signed a plan for self-sufficiency. Despite the inefficiency and the problems that we see in the food supply chain, where we have to adopt some necessary measures to keep the supply and provide food directly from producers to consumers. Food industries need to intensify the food and personal hygiene measures to avoid and to reduce risk and ensure traceability of foods. And we need to add to this the health of producers and consumers to avoid contagion. And the safety, the security and food safety have not been affected in our budget. And technology will help us increase all the processes. The security, traceability, and products will have a key role in the markets. I think that we will see from this pandemic people focused on the humane and the relationship areas, greater awareness on all these topics, and the consumer will change and has been changing the purchasing habits to guarantee safety and social responsibility aspects, the carbon footprint aspect, and many, many, many changes. And finally, I would ask myself, which would be the main characteristics of the new agricultural sector after COVID-19? Well, I believe that governments will have to promote some financial schemes and support plans to guarantee supply of food or food supply to the population. Our government is supporting strongly those with most needs, but commercial and export agriculture are pretty much dealing on our own, except for some specific programs that have to do with security and health, but the budget has been reduced greatly. I can also tell you that we have to cover most of the basic needs with national supply because we cannot depend on foreign products. And so we are concerned that this year compared to last year, this sector had a cutoff of vast percent and 40%. And so we need to take care of all the impacts in all segments. We want to tell you that we know that other countries have invested between 5 and 30% of their GDP. And in Mexico, as I said before, it's not even 1%. So we need to acknowledge that medium and large producers have been moving into some intelligent models for production that have to be accelerated nowadays. The greatest challenge are smallholder farmers, for which we need to support, and we agree with that. And technologies are a complex topic because now they are geared towards those of lower income. You have 1 minute, Bosco. So it is key to generate new public policies aimed toward or take into consideration this new reality that we're facing. And the other challenge is a Doha round that is been in the past 18 years. Doesn't manage to put industrialized countries in agreement with those in countries in the developing countries. Our the U.S. was supported with $12,000 million, and now with COVID, it got $90 million. So we need to look at seasonability that is violating the pandemic and is violating the World Trade Organization agreements. So there are things that we need to take into consideration with forced labor of children. For example, Mexico does not allow children to work until they become 18 years of age. So we're trying to change that to 15 to 18 in non-hazardous jobs. And this is something that we're doing because people in rural area are getting married at that age. So this is a sector that is working together with the government. We want to be more competitive and contribute and diversify our markets in Latin America and be a sector that is a key sector and be able to work to develop a better scenario together with the government. Thank you. Thank you, Bosco, for your presentation that touches upon some of the aspects that the other panelists also mentioned. With regards to diversity, there's a similarity of topics and the drivers that will help us develop what ICA has been working on for many years in trying to develop a hemispheric regional agenda that will take all this cooperation agencies into consideration. So thank you very much, Bosco. Now we're going to move on to the fourth part of this forum. And I would like to thank our presenters because with their presentations, they pretty much gave lots of food for thought to those over 300 participants that we have listening via the social media. And now we will move into the questions, the Q&A session. Some of the questions are specifically directed to some people, others are more general. So there is a question that is for Gabriel Garcia, which are the challenges in the new agreement between Mexico and Canada and the US within the pandemic context. In other words, how should the links be adjusted in a multilateral sense after the pandemic? Should they be changed? Miguel, 2 minutes. Thank you, Diego. Thank you for the question. I think Bosco might actually elaborate on the question as well. But let's understand a few things. The new pandemic is a continuation of the previous one that lasted for 25, 26 years, or that was enforced for those years. And the agricultural sector had benefited greatly from this agreement. So the TEMEX is created under not harming whatever existed. So I think that the new TEMEC is still giving a part of the agricultural sector the chance to continue succeeding. There are a few things that we're concerned about TEMEC, especially what is related to labor issues, and we're already working on that and we're trying to solve them. But there are other things that we're also deeply concerned that have nothing to do with TEMEC. One topic that we're really concerned about is the protectionist attitude of some sectors within the U.S. agricultural policy to create some barriers to the flow of merchandises, particularly the possibility of establishing seasonability. And in that sense, Mexico is working with all of its players to prevent anything that might violate the agreements. So my impression is that TEMEC for the agricultural sector will turn out well. We're going to have a few new challenges, but we'll have the chance to face those, the environmental part, the labor part, but we can work on those. But this does not solve a problem that we have had historically, which is dealing with the smallholder farmers, those who have not been able to integrate completely to the value chain or who produce with very little efficiency, even though we believe they can do it better. And that's why we are working on helping the smallholder farmers to protect them and improve their levels of income. I don't know if this answers your question, but I'm an optimist. I see TEMEC as a good opportunity, to strengthen and accomplish what we have already accomplished in Mexico to protect some of our sectors. And we just need to work to avoid the things that happen outside of TEMEC, as Bosco mentioned in his presentation, to stop the flow. The WTO is important. The conflict resolution panels will be very important. I don't know. I see that for Mexico, the agricultural sector, particularly the exporting group of fruits and vegetables, will continue growing and consolidating what we've been doing for the past 20 years. Thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you for your answer. We have a question for Roberto Rodriguez. Roberto, the question is hiring at this point due to the loss of jobs. Well, with hiring, having the job losses and having more discussion on how and how frequently you need to buy food, do you think there will be a significant reduction on the number of smallholder producers and women who may participate in the food supply chain? Well, thank you. I don't think that'll happen. On June 17th, the Minister of Agriculture published her plan for the next season for sowing and harvesting. And in this program, there was an increase for family agriculture budget. So I don't think there'll be any problem in the near future. What I do believe will be a problem for the smallholder producers is to have access to technology. That's where I see the problem, because there are many innovative things that they don't know about. And that's a topic that the government is not truly understanding this topic, because technical assistance used to be a governmental role, but today is a very small role. And we still have some budget to assist smallholders. So it's not an issue of whether people are going to buy the products or not. I think that's going to continue. But access to technology, that is going to be an issue. Thank you, Roberto. The new extension systems, the digital production, yes, All those things are very, very relevant things. The digital agriculture issue. So one question for Susana Ituri. And Susana, this might actually even be something that goes beyond Peru. With this new agriculture, where or how can we develop financing mechanisms that may be current and modern to be able to face these new realities? Thank you, Diego. I can speak about Peru's experience at this point, and I think that might be a model, not only to be followed, but to be improved, because our government has implemented a two-phase program known as Reactivate Peru, where small, medium, and micro enterprises can have access to financing through private banks, and they are being helped by the government to get some very low interest loans. During the first phase of this reactivation plan, more than 3,000 companies were benefited, but they saw a few problems of ghost companies and companies that shouldn't be receiving this bonus or this economic support, and right now they're being investigated. So in this second phase that was started about a week ago, the filters have been increased, have become more stringent, so that these type of things do not repeat themselves, and so that the money will actually reach the companies that deserve to get the money and need it. I think that it's been quite controversial, but we know that those who have received this have seen a benefit. And also, we think that the companies that have been benefit have told us that it's been a great support in staying afloat, and particularly not to lose the production that was already on the field, to be able to market it and use it as also some input for the produced products that they had already committed to with the international and national markets. This grant that was given by the government has been a multi-sectorial one, but we believe that it focused on the right people, it can have a much more positive and greater impact in the sectors that need it the most. Yes, thank you, Susana. Yes, people are looking for innovative mechanisms to be able to reactivate the economy through loans for micro, small, and medium-sized companies. And we have seen a diverse number of programs in public and private sector in trying to assist these SMEs that have been, to a greater or lesser extent, effective. So currently, the world is producing enough for 12,000 million people. And 40% of what is produced is being wasted. So in an market, commercial agriculture, such as the one in the South, how can this high inefficiency rates be addressed? Miguel. Yes, thank you, Diego. Daniel, sorry, yes, definitely. About a third of food produced worldwide is being wasted, and it's a huge challenge to find some solution for this. And this would probably have to do with the ways products are being presented and are being consumed, and this will also probably have to do with the perspective of being more efficient with the production processes, and also try to seize the products in a better way. And also in terms of innovation, there are a large number of products that are being wasted because they have expiration dates that are too close to the production date. And so supermarkets won't accept them or will remove them from their displays. So we need to be very careful in terms of safety and everything, but we still need to see if we can give those some other destination, maybe give it to the population that are needing food. And so to have a wider view. And I don't know if it was Wasco, the one who mentioned the need to be, to show solidarity. And that's a huge challenge. Thank you very much, Daniel. A question for Vassal Stewart, our colleague from the Caribbean. And this is the question. When we talk about institutionality and strategic alliances, according to your experience, the experience in the Caribbean, who should take the initiative of leading these linking mechanisms, these associations or alliances?
Thank you very much, and thank the questioner for the question. We believe that it has to be driven by the private sector. And part of what the Agribusiness Association has been doing is to bring the private sector partners together in an organized way so that they can lobby the government in the first place to provide the support that is required. So for example, here in Trinidad, we have met with the government, have had discussions about the provision of financial support to the agribusiness organizations. For example, the Fruit Processors Association, to provide them not only with technical support, but some funding in a joint venture approach to establish an agro-processing center for fruits. That has had, I think, very good response because the government now see an organized entity with which they can interact. So I would respond to that by saying, first thing, the farmers to begin with have to be well organized to be able to present their case for public support. The challenge that we've had over the years that the non-traditional sector is relatively disorganized. And to move from where we are now to a more structured sector that can respond to the market opportunities, we need to have greater focus on organization. I also saw a question on the issue of water, which I wanted to respond to as well.
I'm sorry, this is interpreter speaking. I can hear two microphones, one in English and one in Spanish. One moment, please.
So to conclude, the action, I think, has to emanate from the private sector, but they need to be organized in order to get public sector support for these kinds of investment in agro-processing infrastructure, particularly as it relates to the utilization of higher level technologies. In terms of the question on water management and the potential for government to utilize the resources that are now derived from gas exports, given the reduction in prices, to produce, for example, water from desalination plants. The issue would have to be whether it would be economically feasible. We already have production of desalinated water for household use, and there are already questions as to how efficient that is. There's ongoing discussions now in Trinidad about what is the best way to utilize the natural gas and oil outputs, given the limited returns from export, given the low price that we're now experiencing. Part of the discussion has been around using energy to support greenhouse production, particularly as we need to have controlled temperatures and the cost of electricity to achieve that. So that may be, in the short term, a more feasible approach for utilizing our energy resources. Insofar as water is concerned, we have an extensive amount of water that goes to waste during the rainy season, billions of liters. And what is lacking is an effective system to capture that during the rainy season and then make it available during the dry season. In addition, we have tremendous amount of water on the ground, but there's a lack of strategy to capture that and to create a market for farm water supplies. We believe that that's a viable opportunity for the private sector to intervene. And in fact, we are now engaged in some discussions to that
Thank you.
objective.
Thank you, Vassal. Answer. Thank you.
Here we have a question for Bosco and de la Vega, and indicates what type of actions can be taken in order to integrate small farmers to food industrial chains, or that have what type of links could have between the farmers and large farmers with private public alliances. Thank you very much, Diego. Unfortunately, here we have the Subsecretary Miguel Garcia, that together we have built, I think, the best outcome of the public-private alliances. We name it Maize for Mexico, Corn for Mexico. And what we did with the Secretariat of Agriculture, with CIMIT, also Cofinese, Centur, a great advisor, and we joined all the agricultural developers of seeds, fertilizers, etc., for training the large companies of our sectors before they imported those grains. And what we were able to achieve, that during this century 2020, we already have the small farmers, we're giving them seeds, technologies, insurance, logistic, and the most important thing, that we guarantee the purchase of their products. And this is tangible for this year. We're speaking of 1.5 million tons. This food supply chain will be strengthened, and I think we are achieving this. I think this is the best program, and we have plans for the year 2024 to reach 5.5 million tons. Product of this great process that we made through public and private sector. We have the subject for beans, for citrics, for rice. So this is a way that we can integrate the small farmers to the large companies of the countries, which are the partners of SOSEC, and they consume 80% of the grains that are consumed in Mexico. And we have a large strategy in a joint manner, and this has been a positive result. Thank you, Bosco, for your... And with this, we finish this phase of questions and answers. And I thank very sincerely all the special guests and the panelists and speakers to have comply with time and having giving excellent presentations, and have helped us to renew this new vision of agribusiness towards the future. And now we continue with the last part of this forum, inviting again Joaquin Arias, that will help us to make a simple summary of what we have spoken today, of some of the questions that have been we have not been able to answer because of time, and consequently questions and presentations will be reaching all of you after a few days of the event. As a summary of this initiative and as the beginning of this platform of exchange of information and interaction and coordination among the private sectors of the hemisphere. Said this, then I give the floor to Joaquin, who has 10 minutes in order to be able to give this summary. Joaquin has the floor. Thank you very much, Diego, and thank you all for a very rich exchange of information. And I dare to try to summarize in 10 minutes all the proposals and information. And unfortunately, all the information will be transferred to all of you, but will be a reflection of three main points as messages that we should take home with us. Thinking that, first of all, something that has been mentioned during our dialogue, that we have a lot of news of different perspectives for the economy in a very negative manner for America, of drops of 10 point something for Mexico, of drops of more than 2 digits in the southern part in Peru, etc. Nevertheless, we have to recognize that agriculture up to the moment is behaving in a different manner, because in general we have considered agriculture as supplier of essential products. So we see different behaviors in many places. In trade, we were forecasting that 30 something was going to be decreased, and we see that that the world trade has dropped 20%. Nevertheless, agriculture has increased. So we have to take into consideration this, but we have a different panorama with what happens with the profitability of the sector, and we have to accept that the main condition is gaining rentability. We speak about drops in different prices of purchases or sales, and inputs in our prices increase. This is not very positive, but we have to recognize that we have different realities. In this forum, we spoke about coffee, which I have some new data. One would think that sales dropped in coffee, but nevertheless, the consumption at home compensated drop prices in cafeterias, restaurants, and the phenomenon may similar to the flour for bread is more or less the same situation. Different persons started consuming coffee, bread, more volume of different qualities of different coffees. Everybody is changing their habits on consumption. So one sees that despite the drop of prices in coffee, the business still is growing, and nevertheless we have to pay attention how every step in the different chain is what behavior we have in the different food supply chain. We have different sectors in food, beverages, and it deals with terms of earnings more than the agriculture and fishing sector. Nevertheless, when details are studied, the environment is different. When we see the details, we see companies in different groups that have developed very positive. For example, Minerva, you probably know it, with return percent of 40 something percent. And at the same time, there are different companies that we should not be surprised. For example, franchises of McDonald's uh, they lost more than 20% in the earnings. But the scenery is complex. But we have to accept that many of these realities, many mentioned at the beginning of this issue, many of these realities were already before the COVID. So the drop in the price commodities was something that already existed before the pandemic. As corn, for example, maize is connected with the different industries. And the second point I would like to develop is that despite the previous condition of gain of earnings, which is necessary to keep the business, here we see that the agribusiness has different roles, larger roles to care the environment, be social responsible, to offer healthy products, etc. What is the lesson we have uh, taken from a mega study at ICA at the world level? This does not happen in an automatic manner. No product will sacrifice earnings or profitability to be able to be more sustainable. We have to exercise and see what are the technologies, what are the agricultural practices or manufacturing practices that besides improving earning, contribute sustainability and are social responsible, and also can generate products more uh, positive. What an effort with World Bank is that we are doing artificially more intelligence products of to apply technologies that are being developed in the chain, so that we will have an offer in the future, a more varied and more nutritional information, because we see there's a lot of concentration in Latin America on agriculture issues of exports and imports. What do we find there? Already has been mentioned there. We need an adequate combination of incentives for this change. Incentives can be subsidies by the government, but also incentives by the earnings, profitability, and should be enough in order to generate change. These changes do not occur from day to night, night to day. And this also, the cost is included in doing any investment or adopting a new technology. And here the issue about financing came out. Financing can come from the state, can come from banking or any other mechanism of financing. There we have to be very innovative for this issue. And the third point, which was very clear in the discussion, is that the agribusiness private sector has to be important in the building of that new agenda. The government needs a private sector as the private sector needs the state in order to continue the agendas built in a consensus manner, starting from a shared vision. Here you mentioned starting from science, from evidence, will be a more solid agenda than built in an office of a bureaucratic office. And there are many initiatives, private innovation and adoption of new technologies, etc., that need the state support. So together with this, we hear that the organization is very important. Different mechanisms of organization by the private sector, by the producers, will make it much more easier to adopt new technologies or to transit towards this change, and to participate in forums where priorities of policies are defined, because persons that are involved in this business knows where this is going through. Not only participate in the agenda, but to create and to summarize at the end what Bosco said, a combination of health and good health, because it's not human health, but animal health, every type of health, and nutrition, food. We have an important role for food and for nutrition and development. Here we spoke about agribusiness, agriculture, a motor of development. We are generators of employment, and we have an important role in the agenda of post-COVID. And last mention, I heard Diego, almost my time. We have to speak about previous of the pandemic and speak about the condition of post-pandemic, or should we be speaking about a new situation that's always changing, not necessarily because of the pandemic? If something changes after COVID, any other things will be taken into consideration, and this would oblige us to be always in alert, always thinking in towards the future, being more efficient, and here role as organizations of ICA, where we can cooperate with this dialogue of inter-countries and between different actors in a country, and that coordination that needs to be taken by the local government, and know that today is not only important to control the pandemic, but also to build these new agendas of development and to maintain trade flow. And the last one, that we should not forget trade. We spoke about also of everything related to trade. My perception, I do not understand why sometimes we struggle with fights that are not productive. Just to give you a recent study documents that in the world consumption of food, only with 18% is sold of local production, speaking about 100 square kilometers. The rest is trade. Perhaps we should consider trade or the trade stability as a common good. And when we place restrictions that will not be positive, if we close borders, etc., we generate instability, which is not good for anyone, nor for the consumer, nor for the producer. So I leave you there with the last view. Thank you very much. You have mentioned 6 or 7 points which are very important for the new paradigms, and those of you would think that this is an opportunity, of course, an accumulated effect since the Twin Towers, since the crisis of 2009, and this situation of COVID, the new concept that makes us think in a new order, world order, in order to think on new multilateralism, and also to speak about public issues and others that indicate that these are part of the natural cycles of economy, of which we have to adjust ourselves in uh, time. This is an opportunity to seek paradigms and reevaluate what we are doing, and to project ourselves towards the future with new visions, more sustainability, more equity, and more productivity. These are the 3 central elements. We should not forget the sustainable goals of development. And today, perhaps we are leaving that for its application without thinking too much. But I think that this is a route that we have to evaluate, and that will allow us to have a critical route how the world will be, and to have positive outcomes. Thank you very much. I reiterate my thanks to name of ICA, to our special guest, Victor Villalobos, Roberto Rodriguez, Miguel Garcia, our panelists, and those who we're very thankful. Thank you, Susana, Bosco, Cinia, Daniel, Hazel, and Joaquin, that Basil and Joaquin, that uh, or the coordinators and representatives of this event, and to the different areas of ICTs and the Mexican coordinators and from Mexico. Thank you very much. This is a beginning of a series of events of this type of nature. Maybe some of you have more regional focuses, other through value chains. And what we want is that ICA should be agglutinating in a central manner all the chains in order to continue working in the solution of what we understand is a new agriculture. In other words, we conclude this event, and thank you again for this active and valuable participation of those of you. Excuse me, Diego, just to allow me to add a comment to thank ICA, that support together with HADEC has allowing us, a private sector in Mexico, to access to the market, Chinese market, which we wanted to thank you and your general director to ICA. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bosco. And the invitation is also to other countries, so ICA can help in this manner and of keeping the external markets open, transparent, and with future. Thank you very much, colleagues, and enjoy your afternoon and good weekend. Please take care and keep yourselves safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.